Okay,
I'm ready.
everybody. Erev Tov in Israel. It's a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Yitzchak Blau. I will say I can't exactly say this is his inaugural appearance on E-Team. It sort of is, because Rabbi Blau was one of the few speakers. That's we had when we were doing online programs before anybody heard of Zoom and before new people knew what COVID was. Back in 2008, 2009, we started doing online programs, which actually what helped us to transition so quickly when in March of 2020. So Rabbi Blau gave a couple lectures back then, but this is the first time he's been with us in the current iteration of online learning for Torah Motion. So we really want to welcome him. Rabbi Blau is one of the Rosh Yeshivas of Yeshivat Oraita in Israel. And I asked him to give a series on Agada because he is the author of Fresh Fruit and Vintage Wine, The Ethics and Wisdom of Agada. It's something he spent a lot of time and research on. So it's a pleasure to welcome here to begin the 4-part series. And I want to thank you. He's been friendly with our children, his children, and our children are good friends. So it's a pleasure to welcome Rabbi Blau. Vakasha.
Okay, thanks very much, Reb J. And I'm excited to be back in Torah in Motion after, I guess like a 15-year hiatus, I suppose. Wow. Okay, so I'm particularly excited about introducing people to Agada, and let me explain what Agada is and explain why I'm excited. So the Talmud Bavli, right, our Shas, has a mixture of halachic texts dealing with legal issues, and Agadic texts, which might best be defined as non-legal sections, because most famously they are stories, but it's not just stories. There might be ethical maxims and even economic advice, medical advice, basically the non-legal portions. And there's this fascinating thing that Chazal chose, that they easily could have written 2 separate books, like a book of legal code and a book of stories. And we have that in our tradition. Like when we're reading the Shulchan Aruch, we do not expect a story to emerge in the middle. And indeed, a story does not emerge. As far as I know, there are no stories in Shulchan Aruch. There is only legal rulings. And when we're reading, Medrash Rabbah or Sipurei Rav Nachman, we do not expect halachic discussions. So there easily could have been a decision. There's going to be the halachic part and the Agadic part. And Chazal seemed to think that the ideal Jewish book would have both. The ideal Jewish book would have law and narrative. And I think it's pretty clear that they got that idea from Chumash. I've asked, how did Chazal know the ideal Jewish book should have law and narrative? So I think everyone opened their Chumash and they took notice of the fact that, Vayikra is almost all law, Bereshit is almost all narrative. Shmot is a nice divide between law and narrative. So I think that set the tone for the Talmud Bavli. Okay, secondly, so I should just point out, there's a great group here. I'm sure you have a lot of intelligent comments. I'm really going to open the floor for comments at the end, but if anyone would like, you could write in the chat box during the shiur. But for the most part, I will, as it were, open the floor for comments, questions after 1 hour when the shiur is towards the end. Okay, I feel I should just greet, I feel badly because there's a lot of people here, but I'll just greet my father. It's nice to see him. And a fellow named Larry Coburn, who's done a lot for Am Yisrael and has been a supporter of mine. So I appreciate his coming as well. Okay, so getting back to halacha and Agada, and what's interesting is that for most of Jewish history, a lot of authorities put more energy into the legal sections than the Agada sections. I think they had a sense that Judaism is a very law-based religion. I think it's hard to deny that. Much more law-based than, Protestant Christianity. And at that point, that became a focus. Just to give you an example, Tosfot, the famous medieval commentary, they have a lot to say about halacha. They have very little to say about Agada. And an interesting thing emerges that if I look at a page of the Vilna Shas, I actually could identify usually whether it's Agada or halacha, remarkably based on how many words of Gemara there are. Because on a page of the Vilna Shas, I see Alan is smiling knowledgeably, excellent. On a page of the Vilna Shas, you have Rashi, Tosfot, and the Gemara basically competing for space. So if Tosfot says a lot, there isn't going to be as much room for Gemara words. If Tosfot doesn't say that much, there's going to be more room. So I think you'll all see this. If anyone check it out, it's just fascinating. Open any page of the Talmud Bavli. If you see it's heavy with Gemara words, probably there aren't that many Tosfot. It's probably an Agadic page. If you see there are very few Gemara words, so you could be rest assured that Tosfot is taking up a lot of room. It's a halachic section. So again, we have this halacha and Agada divide, and we have more of an emphasis on halacha in our tradition. And I would like to balance that a little bit. Now, obviously, I wouldn't say Agada has been ignored. Just to mention one famous commentator, right? The Maharsha, Rav Shmuel Edels, who's in the back of the Vilna Shas, he famously comments both on halacha and Agada. Okay, so it's not that Agada is a desert, but it's certainly still true to say that halacha has gotten more emphasis. And you even get that in yeshiva today. Probably there are people in this room who were in a shiur, they came to a Aggadic section, and the Rabbi said, oh, we'll go through this rather quickly and get back to, the meat and potatoes of Talmud study. Okay, I think probably many of you have probably had that experience. And I think the Aggadic sections are full of meaning, full of insight, and I'd like to put them on the map. Again, I have several educational goals, but that's one of my educational goals. And I even think it's particularly important because people today are really looking for religious meaning, something that's existentially relevant. Now, I'm not saying halacha is not. I think there are reasons it is, but I think for many people, it's easier to see why Agada is existentially relevant than halacha, right? Again, not that there aren't stories that are difficult to deal with, but I think we'll see today some stories where the relevance to our quest to be more moral people, more spiritual people, more understanding people, it's right there, right? You don't have to work at it too hard. Okay, so that's part one, just to recognize what Aggadic literature is and perhaps why one might want to focus on it. Okay, now for part two of the introduction. Maybe we'll just do this with a show of hands. I won't have to open the floor. Okay, I'm going to be very binary for a second, if that's okay. I'm going to divide the world between math and science people and humanities people. I admit it's a very binary distinction. A lot of good people like both. It's really okay. But let's just do it for one second. I'm just curious. How many people here would just raise your hand, okay? Would identify as math and science people? Okay, not bad. Okay, and people would identify as humanities people. Whoa, Ray Kelman, I think humanities won. Okay, wow, very exciting. Okay, now clearly
we're only looking at the people who have their faces on.
That's true. That's true. That's right.
Put in the chat box, but okay, yes.
I admit I didn't even flip to the second page, so that was really could be a non-representative sample. I admit it.
Okay.
But I think there are advantages to both. And I think if we ask the math and science people what they like, I think a lot of them would say they like the fact that you could actually prove your answer, right? You're not sure if a certain scientific experiment will work. So do the experiment. You'll discover if it works or not, right? There's a result that you could point to. And math even more so, right? You could feel confident the Pythagorean theorem is not going to change. That is locked in for eternity. So I think there's a certain definitiveness that's appealing, right? We have arrived at the truth. Now, in the world of humanities, let's say we're interpreting a passage in literature. So I think we often, those who are more math and science oriented are a bit frustrated because they'd like to say, oh, here's my proof for the answer. And it's just not available, right? To say this is the correct interpretation of the passage. Now, let's be careful. I'm not suggesting there aren't arguments to be made. There aren't reasons to prefer one reading to another. I think for sure there are. One reading might have much more support. You might say, oh, this reading has support from the following 4 lines, where the other reading only has support from 1 line. But for sure, there's arguments. But again, I think that definitive quality is lacking. And I think it's important. Those who are already in the world of humanities might be ready to deal with this more easily. Those who love math and science, so maybe on a certain level, you might like the rigor of halachic study more. You might find that, in law, in logic, there's more definitive approaches. But at the same time, I would say, look, not all of life is math and science. Okay, whether you're a math and science person or a humanities person, some of life is like the humanities. Like when you're having a relationship with your best friend, it's not a mathematical formula, right? Not everything can be boiled down that way. So I think when we're interpreting a text, we have to be open to that mode. Okay, so that's my second part of introduction, that we're going to try our best. We're going to try to bring arguments for a particular reading, but we shouldn't be kind of in the mathematical mode where here is the equation that proves this is the right reading. That's not really the way to tackle literature. Okay, everybody go to that? Okay, great. Now for the third part, and it's going to lead us right to our first text. So there are different aspects of interpreting literature. One aspect is certainly as follows. The author would like to convey meaning. Okay, I take it as a given that Agada tries to convey meaning. It's not just, art for art's sake. And one of the ways to convey meaning is symbolism. Now, it is a very, very powerful tool. And the author could use a lot of different things as a symbol. For example, a character's name could be a symbol. A character's physical characteristics could be a symbol. A number, right? Numbers are extremely powerful in the world of symbolism. So a number could be a symbol. And I guess an object could be a symbol. What if a person's holding a certain item? Okay, so you already can see a lot of different things that could be symbols, right? Numbers, names, objects, seasons, time of day, plenty of things could be symbolic. And now we're going to try to get down to business here. Can we come up with some kind of, sorry. And there's a flip side. What's the flip side? I think it would be overkill to say every item is symbolic, right? Every number is symbolic. Like, let's say, no, I'm not sure how many people are in this year. Let's just pick a number. Let's say there are 54 people in this year right now. So when you say to me, actually, looks like there's more. That's great. Wow, they're coming, very impressive. If you say to me, why are there 54 people in this year? So I could say, oh, 54 is a very resonant number in our tradition. Here's its symbolism. No, 54 people are in this year because that's who showed up. That is the number who showed up. And sometimes if I'm telling a story, I might have details just to flesh out the story, right? If there are no details, there's no story. So it would seem like a little bit overkill to say every single detail in the story is full of symbolic meaning. But now is where I get to my tricky thing, where I'm not in the world of math anymore, in the world of humanities. I now, every time there's a number or a name or a symbol, I can ask myself the question, does it have symbolic meaning or does it not? And I'm open to the fact that sometimes the first thing will be true, sometimes the second thing will be true, which means there's no definitive answer. Should I be searching for symbolic meaning? Should I just say it's just a detail to flesh out the story? But we're going to try to do today, maybe this will make the math people happier, we'll try to come up with some criteria. What could be happening in a story that would make me suspect there's something symbolic going on? It's not just a detail to flesh out the story. Okay, everybody okay with that as an introduction? If we get to the first stories, we're good? Okay, let me see if anybody has raised something in the chat. I think we're good. I think it's just Rabbi Kelman, right? Okay, terrific. Okay, so let's start with the first story. I'm going to do share screen, and then we'll proceed. Oh, wait. See, I always forget. I forget that not just do I do share screen, I have to open the document first. That would be smart. Okay, here we go. Let us open the document. Okay, I think a lot of you might have access already, but I think I should do share screen anyway, I believe. Okay, and now share screen. Okay, terrific. Here we go. Okay. Just ready, Calvin, do you have any strong feelings if I should read it, the text in Hebrew or English, or Aramaic or English?
It's up to you. If you want to do little parts in Hebrew or Aramaic, I think it's good. If you translate it, gets the real feel, you know? And then just,
okay.
But I wouldn't do long passages in Hebrew, long, you know?
Okay, great. So here's the story. So we're in source one. It's going to be a story from Masechet Yoma, Masechet about Yom Kippur. I'm going to do it in the original and translate, but anybody who wants is feel free to follow along. The translation is just under the original. Okay? So here's just be a good example of one kind of symbolism, which is incredibly convincing, where you should find meaning in the choices. Here we go. So there's a source that says that a man named Nicanor brought doors for the Beit HaMikdash, very fancy doors, and he had to travel to Alexandria to bring the doors. And it says that a miracle occurred that enabled him to bring the doors. So then it wants to know what was the miracle. Okay, so now if you're in the Hebrew original, it's towards the end of the first line, really the second line in English. Amru kishahalach Nicanor lavi daltot me'Alexandria shel Mitzrayim. See, he wanted to bring doors from Alexandria, right? Alexandria was a major city, so you can get fancy doors there. So he's bringing doors from Alexandria back to Israel, and it's by boat. The Chazi Rato, in his return journey, Amad alav nachshol shebeyam litavo. A storm came that was going to drown the ship. Okay, now I'm going to do a little bit just summarizing now. I'm not going to be reading in the English or the Hebrew. Okay, but you could follow along in either if you'd like. Okay, so the crew did what they naturally do. You try to lighten the load. There were these heavy doors he was bringing for the Beit HaMikdash, for the temple. So they threw one into the ocean. But still, the sea did not get calm. And now the boat is still in danger. So clearly their next move is to throw the other heavy door into the ocean. And this upset Nicanor very much. So he wraps himself around the door and he says, if you're going to throw the door in, throw me in. Okay, once he says that, the sea calms down. Great. I guess that might be already one of the miracles, but we'll see it's not done yet. But now Nicanor, the rest of the journey, he's upset. He's upset because he's missing a door. He wanted to donate 2 doors to the Mikdash, and now he's only donating 1. Now they get to the port of Akko. Good news. According to the first opinion, the door had swam along with them. So they look at the side of the boat, and the door's there. So they did not lose that door that was thrown in to the ocean. Okay, but let's look at the second one now. Okay, so in the Hebrew, original, I am on the 5th line, towards the end of the line, V'yesh omrim. V'yesh omrim, some people say, Beria shebeyam balata, a sea creature swallowed up the door, V'hikitia liyabasha, and spat it out, vomited it onto the dry land. Okay, now let's stop for a second. Okay, if you are a reader with any Jewish knowledge whatsoever, or at least a minimum of Jewish knowledge, I think you'll all agree with me, it is impossible to read this story without thinking that Sefer Yonah is lurking in the background. I imagine many of you are already thinking that. And this gets to something that study of Bibles talked about a lot also, something that the Bible scholars like to call intertextuality. They did that later stories are reacting or connecting to earlier stories. And that's part of what it means to be part of a canon of literature. Okay, I would suggest it's not just Judaism, right? A lot of modern writers, it's hard to not read their novels without, Shakespeare's lurking in the background. Like when Wallace, right, David Foster Wallace calls a book Infinite Jest, he assumes you'll get a reference to Hamlet, right? And he's working off that. Now, again, you could ask, what is the reference to Hamlet? But he's certainly making a reference. Now, here I would argue, I like this example because I think even a skeptic should be convinced. So you say to me, oh, I don't see any Yonah parallels there. I think that's pushing it. Well, let's think. Someone's on a sea journey, right? They have to lighten the load because of a storm. He says, you should throw me in. And then if it wasn't enough, a fish swallows something and spits it out in dry land, right? There's like 4 elements in a short story that all have Yonah written all over it. So it seems to me there's no escaping the fact that the author of this story wanted us to think about Sefer Yonah. I think there is no denying that. And at that point, obviously, you could then ask the follow-up question, which I'll discuss very briefly. What is the point of the Yonah connection? But I think that it's connected is there. And I think we already have a methodology, as it were. I raised the question, how do we know when the items matter? Is the fish significant? Is the fish just advancing the plot, the sea creature? But I think now it's really clear. There's so much going on here to make us think of Yonah. So I'd say the fish has symbolic import, meaning one category is when the story or the details work off something that is well known in our tradition. I think that we're going to see another category or 2 more categories, but that is a great category, especially if it's a biblical story. Right here, the connection is just so strong. One more simple example of the point. Like, let's say somebody, I don't know, wrote a poem and in the poem, there's a snake in the garden. So again, I think if you're part of the Western world, you say to yourself, snakes in the garden are about the beginning of Sefer Breshit. That's the only resonance all of us would hear in a snake in the garden. So I'm going to make a brief suggestion about the Yoma story, but in my mind, this really proves category 1. What is category 1? There is some resonant imagery in our tradition, and therefore you should pick up on that right now. By the way, it doesn't have to be a biblical story. It could be something in Talmudic lore, right? Maybe there's certain items that take on a particular resonance in the Gemara, and another Gemara could work off that. But certainly if something's in Tanakh, I think that is a very strong argument. My one brief suggestion here is as follows. But again, this is not my main topic today. I should say one more thing, which is the Rev J. I think there was a request to post the source sheet again. I don't know exactly why.
They're posted.
Okay. Thanks very much. Okay, so when you have these intertextualities, when we're drawing a connection between A and B, like clearly there could be 2 possibilities. I'm trying to show that A and B are the same, or I'm trying to show, oh, look at all the similarity, which only highlights the great difference between them. Okay, I can't resist. I have to use one biblical example because it's just the best example. Okay, and then we'll come back to here. Okay, because a lot of the techniques we're discussing about how to interpret literature and stories could apply to Tanakh also. So many of you may know that the Tanakh in Breshit Yud Tet has a story where Lot provides hospitality and the people of Sodom are very unhappy about it. And there's a story in Sefer Shoftim, also the 19th chapter, where a very similar thing happens in his town in Binyamin. It's the story of Pilegesh Begiva. And there's so many parallels. It's a no-brainer, right? The plot is the same. The terminology is the same. Okay, but what's the point? So here I think it really goes both ways beautifully. The people of Sodom hate hospitality. Shoftim Yutet is Israelites. They're Jews. They're from Shevet Binyamin. So maybe it's saying, oh no, guess what? Jews could corrupt themselves so much, they turn into a stone. That's what the parallels are doing. And indeed, Nevi'im say that sometimes. You guys are like stone. So maybe that's the point of the parallels. That would be, why is B have all these references to A? Because B equals A. But you could say, and it's not contradictory, that there's also a contrast being made. That in this stone story, it says, everybody came, Kala Ami Katzeh, and it says, Minar Vad Zakein, even the youth came. Right? Imagine that, like the youth are invited to communal rape, right? Just a crazy thought. So, and in Giva, arguably, it's only a certain group of people. It's not a citywide event, as it were, a citywide extravaganza. So there's a great example. What does an author accomplish by having B linked to A? Could do a comparison. Oh, Binyamin could be just like stone. It could be a contrast. Oh, notice the difference. One is a statewide ethic and one is some ruffians. Okay, getting back over here, I would suggest, and again, I admit this is a bit more speculative. I mean, for years, it's obvious to me there's a Yonah parallel. It is not obvious what to make of the Yonah parallel. I'm open to other suggestions. Please send them in the chat, or you can tell me later. I thought maybe there's a contrast here, that both Yonah and Nicanor are willing to be thrown in, but in Nicanor's case, it's much more from a place of idealism, and in Yonah's case, it's much more of like almost an apathy or a death wish. Like Yonah clearly doesn't want to help. Like, think about it. Where is he when the sea is storming? He's like asleep in the bottom rung of the boat. He is not someone who's caring, who's empathetic at this point. He's kind of just avoiding. Whereas Nicanor, I think, it's all from a place of great caring, right? He very much wants to bring his door to the Mikdash. Obviously, he doesn't want to kill anybody in the boat, but he's extremely attached, right? So again, that's just a suggestion, but this is my first category. Okay, with that, we're now going to go down to a different story, which we'll discuss in greater depth. And this is much more subtle. I purposely started with an obvious one. This is still within the same category. This is a much more subtle one, but the subtle one will take more work to convince you. Okay, but what are we looking for again? Category one is when there's a biblical resonance. There's something in the story that makes us think of a biblical tie-in, and that could give it symbolic weight. Okay, here we go. I'm going to do the same thing again. Actually, maybe I'll read this one in English. Okay, maybe I'll read this one in English. It would be nice to the English people. But anyone who wants to read the original, please just stay on the top there. Oh, wait, I just realized if I do the English, you won't be able to see the Hebrew, right? All right. If you have your own source sheet, you could bear with me. After I move up, after the English, I'll move it up if anyone wants to read the original. Okay. This is a Gemara in Menachot, really an absolutely amazing Gemara. Once a man who was very scrupulous about the precept of tzitzit heard of a certain harlot in one of the towns by the sea who accepted 400 gold dinars for her hire. He sent her 400 gold dinars and appointed a day with her. Okay, so we know two things about this fellow. He is scrupulous about tzitzit, and he hired a prostitute. And again, I'm not an expert in the going rates for prostitution in the ancient world, but I'm going to assume that this is a lot of money. Okay, I assume it's a lot of money. Okay, next. When the day arrived, he came and waited at her door. And her maid came and told her, that man who sent you 400 gold dinars is here and waiting at the door. To which she replied, let him come in. When he came in, she prepared for him 7 beds, 6 of silver and 1 of gold. And between one bed and the other, there were steps of silver, but the last were of gold. So again, certainly imagery of opulence, right? Gold, silver. She then went up to the top bed and lay down upon it naked. He too went up after in his desire to sit naked with her. Now, don't forget, this fellow was very zealous about tzitzit. So if he took off his clothes to be with a prostitute, among those clothes are a pair of tzitzit. Okay, what happens now? When all of a sudden the 4 fringes of his garments struck him across the face, whereupon he slipped off and sat upon the ground. So he decides he's not going to go through with it, and he gets off the bed. So she comes after him. She also slipped off and sat upon the ground and said, okay, now let's pay attention now, because the dialogue between them is absolutely fascinating. Let's see her first reaction and her second reaction. So she says, by the Roman capital, I will not leave you until you tell me what blemish you saw in me. So again, she assumes that he's just a hedonist. Somehow she must have some wart on her foot that scared him off, right? Something scared him off. Okay. By the temple, he replied, never have I seen a woman as beautiful as you are. Nothing to do with your looks. But there's one precept which the Lord our God has commanded us. It is called tzitzit. And in regard to it, the expression, I'm the Lord your God, is twice written, signifying I am he who will exact punishment in the future. I am he who will give reward in the future. Now that tzitzit appeared to me as 4 witnesses testifying against me. Again, this fellow cared greatly about tzitzit. And now he thought about that third paragraph of Shema, tzitzit, which mentions I'm the Lord your God, God's the one who rewards, God punishes. Did Tzitzi testify? It was too much for him. I can't go through with it. Okay, now what's her second reaction? She said, I will not leave you until you tell me your name, the name of your town, the name of your teacher, the name of your school in which you study the Torah. So interestingly enough, this guy's a yeshiva bacher, right? He has a Rabbi, he has a Beit Midrash, he has a name. Okay, she wants all the information. He wrote all this down and handed her. Again, so now she's got a piece of paper with his information. Thereupon she arose and divided her estate into 3 parts. Okay, so this apparently really shook her up. She wants to change her life. And she's a wealthy woman. So what does she do with her money? 1/3 for the government, 1/3 to be distributed among the poor, right? Notice she's now a balt staka. 1/3 she took it in her hand. The bedclothes, however, she retained. So she needs to support herself. She takes 1/3 of her estate and the bedclothes. Notice the first third went to the government, which is interesting. When I first read it in my life, I thought maybe some kind of patriot. She wants to give to the authorities. Rashi says it's so that the authorities would allow her to convert, which is quite interesting. I guess she was a well-known woman. Maybe it wouldn't look so good in that world for this well-known woman to convert to Judaism. So she gave him a little bribe. I'll give them 1/3 of the money at my estate, and they're not going to give me a hard time. Okay. Now comes the amazing conclusion. Okay, after she changes her life and divides up her estate, what does she do? She then came to the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Chia. And apparently she came to his Beit Midrash because that's where this fellow studied, and said to him, Master, give instructions about me that they make me a proselyte. I'd like to convert. Now Rabbi Chia was no dummy. He saw this strange woman. He says, wait, what's going on? My daughter, he replied, perhaps you have set your eyes on one of the disciples. Maybe you're not sincere. It's not really that you're attracted to Judaism. You think one of these Shiva guys is handsome. Maybe that's why you're here. Okay, now comes something that's fascinated me for a long time. She thereupon took out the script and handed it to him. Now, somehow, she convinces Rabbi Chia that she's genuine. Now, like biblical stories, Talmudic stories are not full of detail. Okay, sometimes there's little gaps. So I'm open to suggestions later also, like what exactly did she do? Because you'll see Rabbi Chia's reaction. He's convinced she's genuine. Was it the mere giving the piece of paper? Rashi says that she told him her whole story, which doesn't say that in the text, but it makes more sense. If she told him the whole story, maybe he heard like, oh, she is really sincere. There's something authentic about her quest to become Jewish. But now what does Rabbi Chia say to her? Go, said he, and enjoy your acquisition. Meaning, I'm going to convert you and you are going to marry that fellow. Really fascinating. Those very bedclothes which she had spread for him for an illicit purpose, she now spread out for him lawfully, right? So, and don't forget, she'd taken 1/3 of the money and the bedclothes. Now she can spread it out, not in a prohibited context of prostitution, but a permissible context of marriage. Okay, great. So this is a fascinating story on many levels. But if I ask you, are there details that have symbolic significance? So clearly, maybe I'll look in the chat box for a second. Let's see what people have said. Okay. Very interesting, Shelley. Okay, so Shelley is already working off a few biblical stories. Okay, excellent. Okay, and clearly, as it were, seduction scenes might be relevant. Okay. Very good. I see Herb Andiona said very similar to me. Terrific. Okay, excellent, Herb. Very good. We got good comments here. Okay, so you are right. You're already thinking the right terms. Let's just think for a second, though, about particular, let's start with numbers. Okay, let's start with numbers. We don't really have names in the story. Like, we can't really work off names because we don't have names. I guess you have Rabbi Chia, I suppose, but you don't really have names. So you had 6 and 1. 6 and 1 can be significant. You had 400. But I'm going to remind you of something. It wasn't just 400, it was 400 coins. So if I ask you, does 400 coins have biblical resonance for any of you? What would you say? Let's go back to the chat. I'm sure someone's already answered the question properly. Okay, very good. So 400 coins would make me think of Avram. But I agree, though, it's not as convincing as the first story. First story had so many Yonah references. Like, it's impossible to deny the first story is making the Yonah connection. The second story would say, wait, that's not so much to go on. So I'd like to do a longer analysis of the story and perhaps justify why I think it is an Avram reference. And here I want to give credit. There's a beautiful reading of the story that I cannot say I contribute to whatsoever. I think often in life, I feel like I'm not such an innovative thinker, but I can recognize good material and look at it and teach it. So Rabbi Eliezer Berkovitz, in a book called Crisis in Faith, has a chapter on Jewish sexual ethics. And he has a brilliant reading of this Gemara. Okay, and he argues, don't think this is a Gemara about tzitzit. It's actually a Gemara about sexual ethics. And he says there's a clear transition, right? There's the story till he chooses not to go through with it. And then there's the story after he chooses not to go through with it. And Rabbi Berkowitz asks the reader to contemplate what's the difference between the interaction in the first half and the interaction in the second half. And there's two very powerful things. One, what conversation takes place directly between them in the first half? The answer is none. Meaning there is conversation, but how does it go? It's all through the maidservant, right? The maidservant says to the Zonah, the guy's here. And she says to the maidservant, he could come in. So the first time they talk to each other is after he gets off the bed. That's the first thing I would say. This Rabbi Berkowitz says. The second Rabbi Berkowitz notices is, wait, the second thing she says to him is, what's your name? That means she did not know his name in the first half of the story. Now, I think there's an even sharper way to say it. I think Rabbi Berkowitz says this, if I recall correctly. You could say that the fellow has no name in the first half of the story. But there's another way to say it, though. He does have a name in the first half of the story, or an identity. What's his identity in the first half of the story? How is he referred to at one point? He does have a name or an identity in the first half of the story. So let's see if someone said what it is. Okay, not yet. Okay, and when tell me what his name.
That man.
I will go even further. Okay,
The man who's scrupulous with tzitzit. Right.
Okay, true. You're right. That's how the narrator introduces him. But how later does, give me 1 second here to get back to, here we go. Just want to do a wide screen again, which I somehow messed up. Okay, so in any case, how did they refer to him? How does the maidservant refer to him? As the 400 gold coin guy, right? Because what does she say? 400 gold, the man who sent you 400 gold coins is there. Okay, so at that point, he has an identity. He's 400 gold coin mine. Okay, so here we go. Now I see what I have to do. Okay, we're getting there. Sorry about that. Okay, and I said figure out how to move the list of names to the side. Let's see if this does it. Okay, terrific. Okay, so how, if 400 gold coin guy is there, that's his identity. So Rabbi Berkowitz says, what do we have here? We have a model of two ways that men and women interact. Okay, and what halacha is trying to accomplish, right? The Jewish sexual ethic is that people should be related to as people and not as objects, right? There's an argument against objectifying the other. So the best example of a sexual objectification would be prostitution. Right. In this particular case, the man is just a source of money for the woman, and the woman is just a source of physical pleasure for the man. And when they're going through with it, there's no need to talk, because if you're objectifying somebody, you do not need to talk to them. Right. You don't have to talk to your ice cream cone or your chocolate bar. Okay. Conversely, once they're not going through with it, all of a sudden he becomes a person, she becomes a person, and they decide to talk. Okay. So that is the first part of it. Secondly, again, his identity. A name is a particular identity. A name is a personhood, right? But when he's a client, he's just 400 gold coin man, right? He'd be the same as any other client. So here we have, I think, really a brilliant reading of the story. Okay, so this story would be pointing towards how do we move from the first kind of relationship to the second kind of relationship? How to move from an objectification of the other in a male-female interaction towards a personhood of the other in male-female interaction. And I think the last line is actually crucial. And this is in Rabbi Berkowitz also, because some people have said to me, I even thought this once myself, that the last line ruins the story. Because at the end of the day, he does get her. And she gets him. So maybe there's no real sacrifice here. But I think the answer is, you can't take this message too far, right? Judaism is not rejecting sexuality. It is just channeling it. Meaning sexuality is legitimate and positive in a married relationship. So therefore, it's really, the last line is really perfect. Those bedclothes were really problematic in a prostitution context. But in a marriage context, we fully endorse them. Okay, so just to sum up, what does Rabbi Berkowitz say? Rabbi Berkowitz says, this is a Gemara about Jewish sexual ethics, and that's the message. Now, before I get to the 400 gold coins, I have to take advantage of a situation here. Okay, because as many of you know, I normally teach 19-year-olds at a right in Lindenbaum. So if I make a cultural reference about a song I like or a TV show, it's usually like they don't get it at all. Like I'll make a reference to Star Trek, and 1 out of 70 people will get it because his parents made him watch Star Trek or something like that. But since we have a crowd who's like closer to my age or older, so I'm going to try it out. So when my wife and I were just married, there was a show called ER, and they once had the following episode, okay, which was as follows: that George Clooney was a character on the show, and the Clooney character, hey, Zachariah, please come here for 1 second. The Clooney character was a bit of a womanizer, okay, and I just want to get back to the screen and stop the pause. Okay, and there's one show where he's with a woman in his apartment, and she has some kind of epileptic seizure. So he, of course, puts her in the car and runs to the hospital. And as soon as he gets there, he's carrying her in. He's in a little bit of a panic with great urgency. As soon as he gets there, one of the fellow doctors says, "Oh, let's get her history. What's her name?" And the Clooney character says, "I don't know." And then they go straight to the commercial. Okay, I'm curious if anybody else here in the room remembers that. Okay, so in any case, my wife and I are sitting there, and I said, it's got to be that some writer's an ex-yeshiva kid who read Rabbi Berkowitz. Like it's too parallel. It just can't be. Okay, but think about it, it's a very parallel scene. Like he's willing to be with her, even though he doesn't know her name. Okay, so that I think is pretty powerful. And it really, okay, that's interesting. So I see there's a lot of interesting comments here. We'll get to at the end. It is interesting here. What does this say about converting for marriage's sake? There's a lot to be done here, but sometimes you have to pick your spots. So we're not going to deal with that right now. We're going to deal just with Agada's meaning and its details. Okay, but let's say I accept all of that. I accept Rabbi Berkowitz's reading. And I think it is a very powerful reading. Let's go back to the forged gold coins. So notice there's a source called Keren Ora, source number 3, which says, the dalod meot zehuvim hanitan b'schara, these forged gold coins, heim lumat dalod meot shekel kesef, asher nitan b'kinyan stei machpelah. They correspond to the 400 silver coins. I admit one's gold and one's silver, but still 400 coins that Avram used for buying the burial plot for Sarah. Now, the Keren Ora is a little bit frustrating because what's his last word? The Havein. You should understand this. Now, he doesn't tell us what it means, but I wish I knew what he thought. I don't know. But in any case, I would say, wouldn't it fit great with Rabbi Berkowitz's reading? Meaning, what would an allusion to the Ma'or HaMachpelah story say? Is that not Avram's ongoing dedication to a deceased wife? If you love your wife, you love your spouse, you want to make sure they have an honorable burial. What if it's difficult? What if it's expensive? Who cares, right? You would like your wife to receive, a distinguished goodbye. So you might say at that point, a reference to Avram Tzara is perfect. Again, I think it could be some of you in this chat, right? Some of you 78 are not convinced, but I would just say that makes it more convincing. So again, as I said, we're trying to do not an absolute proof, but more or less convincing. What did we have in the first story? The evidence was overwhelming that it's a Yonah tie-in. What do we have in the second story? I would not say that the evidence is overwhelming that the 400 coins is Avram. I would not say that at all. But if we are convinced by Berkowitz's reading about different male-female interactions and marriage is the ideal interaction, so at that point, it would work out very nicely. Okay, so again, I'll admit, I don't have an absolute proof. I hope the math and science people in the room are not upset. But this, again, would be another example of my first category. Okay, so we're going to go to a second category now. So we're going to sum up, what do we have? Okay, so Rabbi Jaffe is asking me some very good questions. I'm going to duck them for now. We'll see if we have time at the end. Okay, I admit, in an ideal universe, I would also deal with 6 and 7, perhaps then tzitzit. But I would say this, sometimes in life, there can be various details. Let me say this actually, so people aren't stymied. I think saying that I can't interpret anything until I interpret the whole thing, even though it sounds like a very methodologically sound principle, but sometimes you're really gonna be left with questions like, I'm not sure what to make, let's say, of the 6 and the 7. Obviously, if you see 6 and 1, it makes me think of, 6 days a week in Shabbos. But that's not something that I see as naturally tying into, oh, that's funny. Wait, Rabbi Jaffe, are you actually a math and science person? That's interesting. I did not know that. Just so people know that her relative lives in my block. So we have a special connection there. Okay, so in any case, So I hope everyone's okay. I just want to make sure I get the third category in. So I am going to not deal with all your 6 and 7 questions, and at the end, we'll address it, or not. But I'm going to push it off for now. I apologize for that. Okay, let us go to, I'm going to skip a story here in my source sheet and go to a famous story. But again, this is really helpful because I think it opens up another category altogether. Because again, what was my first category? This story has biblical resonance. Actually, you know what? Okay, I'll do a little bit of different order because I want to do a Talmudic resonance also. Okay, so what do we have in biblical resonance? I think a non-subtle one, a very explicit, a very clear one. We'll call it clear biblical resonance. That's the Yonah Nick in our story. And we have subtle biblical reference. Let's go to Talmudic resonance, and then we'll go to something that doesn't have resonance at all. Okay, so we're going to see this in greater depth next week. Now I just want to pick out a line. I think we have a pretty knowledgeable group. So I think many of you are aware of Rosh Shimon Bar Yochai and his son having to hide in a cave. And one thing is clear in that story, we'll do it in greater depth next week, they're very upset about people being engaged in mundane behavior, right? In their mind, real Jews are those that sit in caves and study Torah and pray all day. That's what it means to be a real Jew, not those that plow and plant and cultivate the land. So famously, this gives them a different sense, because at first they're destructive when they come out of the cave. God actually sends them back into the cave. But now it says they come out a second time or a third time. On the eve of the Sabbath before sunset, they saw an old man holding 2 bundles of myrtle and running at twilight. What are these for? They asked him. Okay, so they see an old man with 2 hadas branches, and it's right before Shabbos. They are in honor of the Sabbath, he replied. But one should suffice you. So they say to him, wait, if you just want a good smells are very encouraging. Why do you need 2? So he says, no, one is for remember, one is for observe, right? We famously say, the Seder Dibrot describes Shabbat's command in 2 ways. There's a Zachar passage and a Shomer passage, and that's why he has 2. So this really, I guess, charms them. Not only does he want to honor Shabbos, he's got this idea that goes along with it, why he needs 2 hadas branches. Said he to his son, see how precious are the commandments to Israel? Thereupon their minds were calmed. So they basically needed to meet a simple Jew doing mitzvot, and then they were calmed, like Am Yisrael is okay, right? We don't have to be so angry with Am Yisrael all the time. Okay, great. Now here I want to give credit again. It's not me. Just like I gave credit to Ray Berkowitz, there's a wonderful fellow who teaches Talmud at NYU. His name is Jeff Rubenstein. I really recommend his books. So he has a footnote where he makes a great point. And again, let's say I'm asking, oh, that's interesting that it's Hadassim. Let's ask our methodological question. Do Hadassim have resonance? So I think for most of us, the only thing we think of in Hadassim is Sukkot. Great. So let's think about it, Sukkot. But let's go a step further. What is the most famous midrash around about the 4 minim? So when you were all in elementary school, some of you in elementary school, you probably heard 2 things. Either they represent 4 parts of the body, or they represent 4 different kinds of Jews, right? The etrog is both good smelling and tastes good. So the etrog is Jews who have Torah and masim tovim, Torah and good deeds. But the hadas in that list, Jeff points out, the hadas has good smell but not good taste, meaning it doesn't have Torah, it has masim tovim. So Jeff points out, wouldn't that symbolism be perfect here? So again, we have these learned rabbis looking down on the farmers. So what do these learned rabbis need to acknowledge? The value of the Hadassim Jews. You might be someone who you have a profession, you're not studying Torah all day, you're not exceptionally knowledgeable, but we should still value what you do bring to the table. You bring Masim Tovim to the table. You bring the desire to honor Shabbos to the table. So again, I would say it's only one connection, but it seems to me rather convincing. Again, I would guess I'm bringing another criteria. Does it fit the larger context of the story? This fits beautifully. So notice what we've done already. We now already have clear biblical reference, subtle biblical reference, and perhaps, I don't know where to put it, we'll just call it Talmudic reference. Again, so the references, the resonance in our tradition need not be biblical. They can be Talmudic as well. Okay, I'm just going to look at the chat for 1 second. We'll get to the very last category. Okay, I see people are really getting into it here in the chat. That is exciting. People are raising all their Agadic interpretations. Okay, I'm actually going to leave that aside for the end, I think, and go back to the last one. Okay, let us go to the last one, which is also rather famous, and maybe its fame will help us. the Kamsa Bar Kamsa story. We have focused on numbers and objects, right? The number 400, the object of the Hadass branches. I think we might find a different kind of thing we're going to focus on in the Kamsa Bar Kamsa story. Again, I'm going to start with reading the English, but those who want can follow along in the original Aramaic. The destruction of Jerusalem came through a Kamsa and a Bar Kamsa in this way. Okay, a certain man had a friend Kamsa, an enemy Bar Kamsa. He once made a party and said to his servant, "Go and bring Kamsa." Obviously, he wants his friend to come to the party, not his enemy, but they're very similar in names, so this could be difficult for the messenger. The man went and brought Bar Kamsa, so he brings the enemy. When the men who gave the party found him there, he said, "See, you tell tales about me. What are you doing here? Get out." Right, so the owner of the party is furious, right? He's making this exciting party. He doesn't want his enemy there. It's going to ruin everything. Said the other. Now, clearly, it is quite embarrassing to be thrown out of a party. And apparently, this was a big party. A lot of notables were there, a lot of dignitaries. Said the other, "Since I am here, let me stay, and I'll pay you for whatever I eat and drink." So it makes sense. The enemy says, "I know you don't want to feel like you gave me anything. We hate each other. I'll pay for my meal." He said, "I won't." Now the enemy gets more and more generous, as it were. He really does not want to be thrown out publicly. He says, "Then let me give you half the cost of the party." "No," said the other. "Then let me pay for the whole party," right? What a deal, right? You could have the whole party for nothing. Just let the guy stay. The host, he still said no. He took him by the hand and put him out. So imagine he physically picks him up and throws him at the door. Now the fellow Bar Kamsa is furious. He's been publicly humiliated. And apparently he's also upset, not just at the host, but that no one stood up for him. So said the other, and look who, it's very interesting. We don't find out till now. You know, this is great. This is why I love teaching, because this might be the 60th time in my life I'm teaching this story, but just occurred to me that maybe the rabbis purposely held this information till now for its shock value, right? It didn't say there was a party which the rabbis were at. We're not till right now, we have no idea the rabbis were there. But now what does Bar Kamsa say? Since the rabbis were sitting there and did not stop him, this shows they agreed with him. I guess the rabbis are okay with this kind of behavior. Not a single rabbi stood up for me. Said I will go and inform against them to the government. So I'm going to go to the Roman Caesar and slander the Jews. He went and said to the emperor, "The Jews are rebelling against you." Now, interestingly enough, the emperor is not so quick to jump on the anti-Semitic bandwagon. And he says, I need evidence. Why should I trust you? He said, "How can I tell?" So now Bar Kamsa has a strategy. He said to him, "Send them an offering and see what they were offered on the altar." So he sent them with a fine calf. By the way, I'm not going to get into it right now, but those who have a chance, if you could read it in the original, this is one of the good reasons to read the original. It's not obvious that a fine calf is the right translation. So I'm not going to get into it right now. Those who can read the original, you'll check it out. You'll see what I mean. In any case, well, on the way, he made a blemish on its upper lip, or some say on the white of its eye, in a place where we Jews count it as a blemish, but they do not. So he does a really sinister move, right? We're not supposed to bring an offering that's blemished. By the way, one of the things you realize here, non-Jews can't send offerings to the Mikdash. That's true. Maybe not every kind of offering, but there is such a phenomena as a non-Jew bringing a karban. But obviously, if it has a blemish, we don't sacrifice it. But apparently, this was a very subtle blemish, either a subtle blemish in the lip or a subtle blemish in the eye. But notice the Romans do not consider it a blemish. You can't explain it to them. So now we're stuck. We can't offer this offering because it's blemished, but we can't really explain to the Romans why we're not. So I'm not doing the rest of the Gemara, but in the subsequent story, the sense is that this tension led to a conflict with the Romans. And of course, from 66 to 70 was the Roman-Jewish War, which culminated in the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash. Okay, terrific. But what about some of the details in this story? So I think you could focus on the names, might be interesting. Then I'd have to ask, what does Kamsa mean? What does Bar Kamsa mean? Certainly you could do that. But I want to focus our attention on something towards the end. What would all of you say about where they placed the blemishes? Is it significant that the blemish is on the upper lip and on the white of the eye? Would it be the same story if the blemishes were on the ankle and the forehead, or the ankle and the elbow? Okay, is there any kind of symbolism to a blemished lip or blemished mouth and blemished eyes? Okay, then I have strong feelings about, I'm reading the chatter, strong feelings about the, excellent, Alana. Okay, terrific. Okay, Ruth, great. But I'll go even further. Okay, you're totally right, but I say specifically the sin in question. Now, I know this Gemara doesn't say the words, but it's pretty tempting to connect this to what Chazal attributed the second Beit Mikdash destruction to, with sinat chinam, groundless hatred, that it was that interpersonal enmity that caused the Korban, which, by the way, is not just, theologically true or metaphysically true. If you read either Josephus or Chazal and Gittin, there's no question, it's pretty hard to fight the Roman Empire when you're fighting each other, when you have infighting, right? Those who haven't seen it yet, you might want to see the movie called Agada Korban, which quite well expresses this idea. When different zealot factions are fighting with each other and the zealots are fighting with the pacifists, it's pretty hard to have a coherent strategy in taking on the Roman Empire. So it's not an accident that they lost. But if I ask you, where does one do sinat chinam? So isn't interpersonal ill will most expressed in how you talk about people, how you talk to people, and how you look at them, right? We have this expression in English, looking at somebody with a jaundiced eye, right? It's almost like I can't handle your success. I look at you and I want you to fail. And if I see you really succeeding, like you're enjoying the food at the party, I can't handle that. So then notice, it's not just that the phrase mouth or lip and eye come up in the Gemara. It's a blemish of the lip, a blemish of the eye. And I think it's pretty convincing to say, oh, this is a generation that had a blemished lip and a blemished eye. So let me quote one Marsha, and then I'll wrap this up and wrap up the entire shir, and we can get to questions pretty soon. So I mentioned to you that even though many famous commentaries, such as Tosfot, tend to not put energies into Agada, the Marsha puts a tremendous amount of energies. By the way, it's a little bit different in the current versions of Shas, but if anyone will look it up, it's interesting what they did. There's a different font size. He wrote like a separate halachic commentary and Agada commentary. In the old Vilna Shas, the bigger font was halacha, and the smaller font was Agada. So I'm a little, I want to stand up for the honor of Agada that got the smaller font here. But it's a way of telling, by the way, where there's Agadic sections. If you look at Marsha, where there's small font. So look what the Marsha says at the middle of the first line. Ramaz lahen otodar. What did he hint to that generation? Chayu ben bale lashon hara. As someone said very well in the chat, they spoke lashon hara. What kind of blemish is that? Shumum niv svatayim ba'adam. Means you have a blemished mouth. Your mouth just likes to talk negatively about people. V'amalei bedukin sheba ayin. Some says it was an eye. Shayu ben bal tsarei ayin. Right? No, they had this blemish that they looked at people with a narrow vision, with a jaundiced eye. So I think, again, I'm going to call this a different category. I'm going to call this for lack of a better term, maybe some can make up more like academic, technical terminology for me. I'm calling it just fits the story. Meaning it's true. I have no biblical resonance here. I'm not talking about some other Talmudic imagery. But again, given what happens in the tale, it's a tale of groundless hatred. It's a tale of looking at people negatively. It's a tale of how we talk to people, even the slander that Bar Kamsa gives to the emperor, right? Those are the faults in the story. It's a fault of how we look and a fault of how we speak. Given that, I would say, let's go with symbolism. This is not just to flesh out the details. This is very particular to provide a layer of symbolism. So let me just review the four categories, and then we'll go to the chat and open up the floor for questions. But I just want to again reiterate that we're going to do the best we can. I think I brought pretty good arguments for my symbolic reading, but again, we're not looking for 2 + 2 = 4, right? 2 + 2 = 4 is for math. That is not for interpreting stories. It's one of the reasons, but even in Chumash, even in our divine text, right, there are different interpretations, right? And when we have a Ramban Ibn Ezra argument, each one could bring arguments for their side, but it is hard to bring a knockdown proof for your side, a proof that just annihilates the opposition. But there could still be better or worse reading, like more grounded or less grounded readings. Okay, so what do we have here? Again, just to sum up, we have, why should I look for symbolism? Because it's got biblical resonance all over it, right? That story in Yoma, again, I don't know how you could read it. There's so many Yonah references, right? The ship in trouble, throwing things into the ocean, being swallowed by a fish and spit on the ground. It's clearly Yonah. Then we went to Menachot, which we had Ray Berkowitz's very powerful reading about a Jewish sexual ethic, right? The first half, which is objectifying the other, and the second half, which is personalizing the other. Given that, I thought it became more convincing that the 400 shekel, 400 gold coins, could be a reference to Avram and Sarah being a model of a marriage relationship. Again, it's not as convincing, but there again, the larger context I think is helpful. And indeed, the Keren Ora made that connection. Okay, then we had one with Talmudic resonance, right? Why is the old man running with myrtle branches before Shabbat? So again, if it's the old man, in contrast to the scholars, they're knowledgeable. He's not so knowledgeable, but he's quite committed. He's got good values. So he is, as Jeff Rubenstein points out, he is the Hadass branch of the tradition, the one who doesn't have Torah but has Masim Tovim. So again, I think it just fits really well. So you might again notice, but we're not working off of biblical imagery. We're working off Chazal, rabbinic imagery. Finally, now not every detail has to be working off. Even though it's true, a lot of literature is working within a tradition. Sometimes the detail just has meaning in and of itself, right? Not because it's working off Talmudic story. So that last category, I worked off the Bar Kamsa one, where again, I'm not saying the eye and the lips are meaningful because of some biblical verse, saying they're meaningful because they inherently fit, right? We are seeing interpersonal breakdown based on how people talk about each other, based on how people look at each other. That kind of interpersonal breakdown certainly fits the imagery of blemished lips and blemished eyes. So I think we've done a good job, I hope you agree, of outlining a bit of a methodology. How do I go about deciding what has symbolism, what doesn't? We've now already developed 3 or 4 categories of what would make it more convincing. Okay, let's see what we have in the chat, and maybe then I'll open the floor. Oh, very good. Okay, good to have Rev J here. So Rev J's right. It could be that I've been a little bit too black and white in my contrast here. He is totally right, meaning I was almost implying that in the rigor of Talmudic logic, you could prove who's right. But there's a famous Ramban which says that's not true either, right? Like when philosophers argue, we don't have definitive conclusions all the time. And when Talmudists argue, we don't either. So maybe it's really, I don't know, limited to math or like science where you could have certain experiments. But, okay, so I accept this point. Reb J, you are totally right. I also will accept a point Rabbanit Bracha made, which is, oh, that's great. Okay, we have some really good points here. Okay, I hope I can get to everybody's point. Okay.
No, Rabbi, just you can unshare your screen now, I guess. Just
okay. Oh, that's a good idea. So let me
and maybe go up to the top of the chat. Why don't we start from the earliest comments and work your way down?
Okay, that's perfect. Great. Thank you, Jay. I will figure out as the weeks get better. I will hopefully get better at the.
You said it was 15 years since you last spoke for us.
Yeah, and it was. I don't know if it was as. Rev J, I should put you on the map. You like discovered Zoom before Zoom was a thing.
Correct.
You're like you're a pioneer of Jewish education.
We used Adobe Acrobat. It wasn't even Zoom, but okay, go to the comments.
So just if I open the chat, everyone will see it or no?
No, yeah, everybody can see it. Everybody can see the chat on their own.
Fine.
Go.
Okay.
I guess you're going to start one. One is away from God. One is towards God. Which
okay,
is
great.
That's on the difference between the Yonah story. And
okay, just give me 1 second and open this up.
Ilana's comment. That's really Herb and Ilana said more or less the same thing. You see that?
Wait, so sorry, just under more. Oh, now I see where it is. Okay. Wait, can everyone see this now or not?
No, they'll see it on their own. You go up to 1020.
Okay, got it, fine. So I'm gonna go to the top. Okay, great. Okay, so there's 2 comments here that are really quite sharp. Maybe I'll just go a little bit out of order if that's okay. Actually, no, I'll go in order. Fine, Alana Lubin made an excellent point. Somebody just said this to me, which I think is very beautiful. I was just giving this year in Camp Stone, and a student said it. I thought it was very sharp. I wanted to find imagery in the blemished lips and the marsha, right? A blemished lip and blemished eye would mean that the people are not acting properly in those 2 physical organs, how they look and how they at people and how they talk. But Alana's right. If that's right, this line could take on new resonance. What's the line? It's a blemish for us and not for them. I mean, maybe that's also a sharp line, that the Roman ethic, like if you think about it, like Lashon Hara is really not such a widespread concept, right? Again, I'm not someone who believes like non-Jews have no ethics. They certainly do have ethics, but I don't think so many societies have something that's really parallel to Lashon Hara. So maybe they're saying that, no, you realize the subtlety is not just about the physical animal. It's the subtlety about the ethical values at hand, that kind of behavior is a blemish for us and not for them. So Alana, that is a great reading, excellent contribution. So you could have both a deeper reading of the blemished lips and blemished eyes, and you could even throw in that is also the deeper resonance of, for us, it's a blemish and not for them. That is excellent. Okay, Rabbinit Bracha Jaffe made a very good point also. I would just say that I think the pshat works even if I don't do that, which it is interesting. The famous Gemara that says that Bayit Sheni is a function of Sinat Chinam is not this Gemara. It's a Gemara in Yoma Daf Tet. So it is kind of interesting that almost Gittin might be begging for a reference to Sinat Chinam, but it doesn't say that. So she's right. I can't prove it. It's Sinat Chinam here. And maybe you could prove there's Sinah here, but maybe we don't know it's Chinam. Like maybe it was justified enmity between them. So Rabbi Jaffe, I totally accept your point. It's a very good point. I would just say I don't think it ruins the pshat. It just means perhaps I should not have brought Sinat Chinam into the debate, into the discussion. She is correct. It doesn't say Sinat Chinam. We don't know what caused the hatred, but it is certainly in the interpersonal sphere. As Rabbi Jaffe says, they don't seem to care about public humiliation. So I think at that point, you could still kind of focus on the eyes and the mouth. I think that would still work. Like the eyes might be the host of the party looks and he can't stomach seeing his enemy enjoying a good meal. Like that, even if the enemy's going to pay for it, he just can't stomach that. So I accept both points. Again, Alana's significant addition about blemish for us and not for them. Maybe it's about the ethics of different societies. And Rabbi Jaffe's addition that it might be a mistake to bring in Sinat Chinam, but the pshat still works. Okay, let's see what else we got here. So Nikki Katz, so wants to bring in different biblical resonance. She wants to think about Chava and the apple. Okay, Nikki, I hear what you're saying. Just one tricky thing, although I don't say you're wrong. Okay, and maybe this is tricky for my entire interpretation here. Like a lot of sins could be connected to eye and lip, but actually, I take it back because I would say because Tanakh does describe it as pleasant to the eye. I know this nechmad lahaskil. Okay, the other verb is escaping me right now, but Tava leinayim. That's the phrase. Okay, very good. See. Excellent. I got it both from my son at the under the table and from someone in this year. Terrific. So maybe it's a bit more convincing. I'm sorry, I'm just going to say goodbye to my mother who's going to a meeting. Bye, Mom and Dad. Thank you for coming. Okay, so I should tell you something funny about my mother attending my shiur. So when my mother attends shiur, she never comments because she doesn't want to get in the way. But if I ever ask a question to the shiur and nobody answers, so my mother's nervous that nobody's answering. So then she answers. So just realize that's going to be the pattern for the next 3 shiur. Yeah, that's my mother's pattern. Okay, but in any case, maybe Nikki's pshat's a bit more convincing because again, I would say so many sins could be related to the mouth and the lip, but there you do have a focus on how it looks. So that's interesting, Nikki. I guess the question would then, of course, be if you hear that resonance, what do you make of it, right? As we said every time, like what does bringing that story in, does it create a comparison? Does it create a contrast? So I'm not saying that to knock you out, but I would say that would be the next step, right? Ask what that resonance might add to the story. So I don't know who Cohen is. I don't know your first name, but I did leave out the end of the Gemara. Okay, one of the tricky things with Talmudic stories, I'm not sure we'll get to it this series because it's not one of my 4 topics, but you almost might ask, where does the story really end? By the way, even the Rav Shimon Bar Yochai story is a question because the traditional move is to end in the lines that I cited. Right, what's the ending? When they meet the guy with the myrtle branches and the father and son are reconciled with larger society. But the truth is the Gemara story goes on and there's more interaction. It's not so clear that's really the conclusion of the story. So here too, I kind of, shut the curtains after he does this blemish trick, but there are more things that go on. Some of the sages said this is very dangerous. We could do something that would normally be halachically prohibited. For example, let us bring the karban. It's true, we normally would not bring a Baal Mum, but it's, pikuach nefesh, lives are at stake. Okay. Now I realize that Cohen is another relative of mine. Well, I stacked this year by having 4 to 70 people be related to me. That was like an unfair tactic on my part. Okay, but in any case, afterwards they want to bring the karban, and a man named Rav Zechariah ben Avkulus says, you can't. It's going to cause, people will say it's okay, it'll lead to bad things. And the Gemara is famously critical of this Rav Zechariah. Very interesting, he actually faults him for excessive humility. Okay, somebody who's too humble to make the radical psak that was needed. You are totally right. I think there's meaning to the story where I stopped it also. But people just be aware when you're interpreting a story, one question might be, where do you stop? And I think it comes up both in the Rav Shimon Bar Yochai episode and in the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa story. But you are totally correct. There is a criticism of Rav Chaim ben Avkulas for not letting them to offer the animal. Okay, anybody else with a comment or question? I think I've gotten to all the chat questions. Let me just double check that. And someone could also unmute themselves if they want and ask a question.
Have to go up to the front. You may have gotten them all, but you were working from the back up. If you want,
I see there's a hand up. Can I take it, Rav Jay?
Absolutely. Who? Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so, Suri Rudolph, please.
Yes. Hi. So first of all, I'm not related to you, but I grew up in Elizabeth, New Jersey.
All right. That's like you're related to me. Okay.
Okay. So I was thinking about other times when the number 400 appears in Tanakh, and it's just something to think about, because there are some negative ones, like Esav comes with Arba Me'ot Ish, and I think at some point there's a pasuk about David surrounding himself with 400 ragtag bad people.
Excellent.
But then we also have the 400 virgins from Yavesh Gilad that are married to Binyamin people, in order because everyone else swore off that they wouldn't give their daughters to Binyamin people. So there's I think the 400 coins, clearly the coins aspect.
Okay, very good. Very good.
But the 400 has a dual connotation, because this story has both good, it's at the beginning you think, oh my God, this scrupulous Shomer Mitzvot guy's going to a prostitute. So maybe we're thinking 400 is a bad sign, and then it turns into a good thing. And it's a question of how you read the 400 marriages between the, Yavesh Gilad and Binyamin.
That was extremely clever. I just say one thing before I point out how clever it was. I just want to know, do you know your Tanakh really well, or you use the concordance? How do you get all those 400s?
I have studied with Rabbi David Silver at Drisha for 30 years.
Okay. That was amazing. Next time I see David Silver, I'm going to say your students know all the random 400s of Tanakh. Okay.
I mean, those probably aren't all of them, but they're
not all. No, but I just want to point out two things. Well, one is your methodology just now was very good. I mean, you might say, oh, here's an interesting number. Does it have resonance? I don't know all my Tanakh. Let me do a search. How many times does Arba Me'ot come up in Tanakh? And then I'll see if one of them links to the story. So first of all, as a methodology, that was great. Actually, three things. I very much like your second point, which is the advantage of the Keren Ora, and the one I wanted to emphasize is that it's not just 400, but it's 400 coins. So I think you're right, Suri, that maybe given the various parallels, 400 coins equals 400 coins in a more profound way than any other 400. But thirdly, you said something really interesting, which is maybe the meaning of 400 changes over the course of the story. That was really deep. That was excellent. Maybe I'll tell David that actually.
Thank you.
Because you could ask on my pshat that I'm saying that 400 is the good model, but 400 appears in the first part of the story. So I think someone could ask me, wait, if it's the good model, shouldn't 400 be in the latter part of the story? But I think based on what you said, it's actually quite interesting. Maybe when it first appears, we'll go with a negative reading of 400. But as the story progresses and they move from the prostitution, objectification to an authentic dialogue and relationship, then the 400 becomes the 400 Avram and Sarah. So I really like that. So you should put that in your Perish Amenachot. That is a very good insight.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have to give Jay Kelman credit, because when he referenced the 400 years of the Brit Ben Habitzarim, it got me to start thinking about where else does 400.
Okay, terrific. Anybody else want to make an in-person comment, as it were, or more in-person than chat, I suppose? Or should I look at the chat again? Right.
I think
Rev Jay, what do you suggest?
No, that's fine. Anybody else have any comments to speak up? Otherwise, I think we can move on. I think pretty much, except for my comment in the chat, which is fine. You went through all of them.
Okay, great. All right. So
okay.
I just want, again, thank Jay and the participants. It was really thoroughly enjoyable learning with you. Look forward to continuing.
Thank
Rabbi
you.
Blau.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Rabbi Blau.
Yeah.
Elisheva was in my class for every year of everything. JEC Elementary, Barnard College,
Oh, wow.
Columbia Law
Okay.
School. everything except high school. So I've known, Rivka and your father for a long,
see,
long,
guys,
long time.
I'm sure Jay will relate to this. I can't escape my family. Even if you're not related to me, you know everything about my family.
Of course, I went to Yeshiva University, many, many years ago. We were not there at the same time, of course, because I'm a little bit older. But of course, Rabbi Blau and Mrs. Blau and Dr. Blau, I should say, really, Dr. Rivka, really a wonderful. He's following in his parents' wonderful footsteps. That's
Absolutely.
all I'll say. So, very, very nice to see that. And we'll see you next week. Please.
Okay, great.
Tomorrow, Dr. Tamara Spitz at 10 a.m. Tomorrow, her topic will be bonds and boundaries, exploring the relationship between Moshe Root and their in-laws. Tomorrow night, Rabbi Daniel Friedman will be giving from Teaneck, will be giving the Parshat HaShavua shir, out of the wilderness in search of compromise. Friday morning, I'll be speaking my sitter class on Shema. We're up to V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, finishing Baruch Shem K'mo Malkuto L'am Va'ed. And then Sunday, Rabbi Liebtag will be back after taking off last week. And of course, I'm sure many of you saw our Tisha B'Av program. We sort of all the details there. You can please register and join us, as we were talking earlier. Looking forward to Tisha B'Av, if that's the proper expression to use. But I'm hopefully looking forward to a day of inspiration, whatever it should. We'll have classes when Tisha B'Av is a happy day too. So, anyways, thank you very much, and I think that's it. And we look forward.
Thank
to
you.
Soon.
Thank you very much, Rob.
Okay, and everybody have a wonderful day, and invite a friend to come and join us. Thanks a lot.
Rabbi Jake, may I ask you a technical question?
Sure.
I did a